name is Minty Johnson. Today, it gives me great pleasure to welcome both Dr. Nick Hayes and Dean Porterfield.
Thanks for having us.
Now, both Nick and Dean work at Cumberland Heights. Dean is the director of Arch Academy and has worked for Cumberland Heights for over 10 years. And before that, he worked with adolescent males for over 12 years as the director of an outdoor therapeutic program. Nick is Chief Science Officer at Cumberland Heights. He oversees research and technology related initiatives system-wide. Nick and his teams work on projects that leverage technology applications to improve patient outcomes. Now, my first question to the two of you is, what are the barriers you find that you regularly come across when you're trying to treat or engage young men?
I'll start with that. Like you said, I've been working in the adolescent population for going on 20 years now. I think, and one of the reasons I stick with this population is primarily the fact that it's always evolving. What I tell folks is the adolescent I treated 5 years ago is not the adolescent I'm treating today. And specifically looking at the adolescent male and the barriers that come up with that, obviously is, well, maybe not obvious, but one of the things we encounter is just the barrier that we have with being able to connect emotionally, being able to have these young men to be able to tap in to kind of the underlying issues that brought them to us. So we focus on substance abuse. It's not uncommon that once we start digging, once we get this patient, this resident to us, get them cleaned up, get them sober, and then what's left is all these raw emotions that they haven't experienced in years, and it freaks them out. And so our goal is to help guide them through that, provide the emotional education, also teaching them how to regulate those emotions. The primary approach that I've found effective is when I work with a young male is I don't start with the question, how do you feel? That's one of those things, and they kind of shrivel up, and that's where you kind of get them, you lose them. So I always start with the question is, how do you think? How do you process? How do you digest your world? What does that look like? Like if you would have put me into your mind as best as you could, tell me what that looks like. And ultimately focusing on those thoughts. And then, I come from the belief system that thoughts equal feelings. So if we can break down your thinking patterns, then we can also figure out how and learn to address some of those irrational thought processes and so forth. How then can we connect that to your emotional state? And I think that's powerful for these young men, because then they come to understand that if I can manage the way I think, then I can manage the way I feel. And I'm very calculated in the vocabulary that I use. I don't say control, because that's a sense of either you do or you don't. When I say manage, this is what we're given, we're going to manage those pieces. And, how do we get there? So how do we get this person comfortable with having those conversations? And it's through engagement. What we know, and science has been telling us for a while, is that adolescent males engage differently than females. And a lot of the therapy today is geared towards females. So is some of the educational system and so forth. And so the idea that, having these guys involved with, some sort of kinetic interaction. I mean, I find simply just tossing a ball back and forth in a session will help get that young man to open up in ways that if you just sat there and talk, the traditional talk therapy, that approach is a lot more effective. Not to say that as they become comfortable with you, as they get their skills and so forth, that some more of the traditional approaches don't work. Those two can actually be pretty effective, but you got to figure out how are you going to engage them, and also you have to learn how to do that. So you've got to have impact. I use an approach called impact therapy. If you don't grab them within those first few minutes, they could easily write you off. And I got that experience from residential treatment over the years, but also private practice, because you've got one shot, and then they could choose not to come back. And fortunately, kind of developed an approach that most of my folks that come in, treatment resistant typically, come back. So that's, and tying that to going back to the technology piece and so forth and what we're seeing with these guys, we're starting to see, let's say over the past couple of years, just this overall anhedonia, this Eeyore type team. And you know, I think a lot of that is starting to be contributed to the fact that they are sitting in front of their social media or their gaming and that kind of thing. And part of the downside of social media is the inability to actually learn to interact with people face to face. And so when they get out there, when they become social or put in social situations, they don't have the skills. And it's not uncommon for that to lead to a misdiagnosis as well. You know, some people say, is there some spectrum stuff going on and that kind of thing. And the reality is, once you put them in a situation in which their technology is limited and pretty much monitored and or even at times taken away from them, that they can develop those skills with those peers. And so it's like a lot of in vivo teaching those communication skills. And so, and one of the things that Nick has brought to Arch Academy in Cumberland Heights is these guys check in weekly on a tablet to where they're at, where they're functioning, what's their motivation for recovery. We look at depression, anxiety, those kind of things. And then we can present that data to them. And they'll listen to the data. And it's had an impact on them being able to understand themselves. And the flip side of that is, once we can, and Nick can speak more to that, we can take that data and then also improve our services. So with this population, it's an evolving approach. And again, what we might have been doing, there's things that are tried and true, the 12-step intervention, you know, we get them very involved in that community and going to meetings and so forth, help them engage, provides them those skills that they've been missing, when they can sit around in a circle and actually emote and actually feed off others' energy. But I think, you know, also balancing them with the fact that we can't take away technology. Once they leave us, they got to learn to manage technology. So that's what we're doing. We've created a program and always tell folks that it's going to be an ever-changing program. We're going to have the core pieces that work, that have generated, you know, hundreds to thousands of alumni for us. We're not going to lose those pieces, but at the same time, we're going to step back and always look at the data, look at the research, and create interventions that are impactful. The good thing about the focus on research recently is, I think it's kind of cool when you've been doing something for years and then you know why it works. Like, you knew it worked, but now we have the data to show it works. It's not just anecdotal. So that's my piece.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I was just thinking as you were talking, I mean, you kind of answered all the questions I was going to ask you anyway within that. So that's brilliant. My one thing that came up is, do you think that the young men you work with find it comforting in a sense to be able to express their emotions on the tablets that you have, you know, if they're feeling depressed, sometimes it might be easier if they're used to communicating via technology outside, to then be able to do that inside still anyway, you know?
That's an excellent point. Yes, because one of the things the tablet does is when they fill out that survey, we've got it linked to that provides an alert on our cell phone, our staff. So if a kid responds in a certain way that, you know, I'm feeling more depressed in the past week than I had the previous week, or some of those trigger questions that we've highlighted that would automatically send an alert. I think, and they have said that's the way of communicating that. Sitting across from them and just asking those questions, they might not be as ready. It depends on what the relationship is with them, readily to put that out there. But then you get this alert on your phone that says, you know, hey, little Johnny is struggling today. And then we immediately check in on them. Within an hour of getting that text, we can check in. You know, if it's something significant, it's a safety issue or something like that, we're going to be on that really quick. But for the most part, it's just them saying, yeah, I need to process this. I need to talk about this. And it also validates them. It validates that the fact that someone read their feedback, that someone is hearing what they have to say.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It feels like they're being held. You know, they don't have to say it out loud if they can't, but they know that the support they write it down and support is there, and you will be there to support them, which is, yeah, great. I think a really brilliant way of doing things. Nick, can you explain a bit to me about the work you're doing at Cumberland Heights at the moment?
Let's start with an analogy, right? So right now in the United States, there's only one standard for measurement throughout the entirety of psychological science. Think about that. And it's diagnosis, right? We have no other standardized mechanisms, at least in the US, right, for particular abilities to monitor treatment dosage or intake assessments or how you're doing. None of that exists. Yet a whole field, measurement in psychology, called psychometrics, has existed for nearly 100 years. So why is that? Why are we in this space, in this place where we have such a low sort of bar for measurement, which really doesn't allow us a great opportunity to better inform potential patients and their families of what our treatments are and how they affect you, improve our practices, and then communicate those findings to other external stakeholders, whoever they may be. We have invested, so with that said, we've invested strategically and progressively, or Cumberland Heights Foundation has as a team, to better understand just that very simple question: how do our treatments affect patients over time? And so we leverage technology accelerants and sophisticated data science techniques to just better take pictures, quote unquote, of our patients using data. And it's a really useful tool, not just for the nerdy desires of Nick, right, but for our clinicians and patients alike. Dean alluded to the fact that, so the iPhone was released in 2007, right? So that's just almost 13 years, and it's fundamentally, smartphones and smart devices have fundamentally changed our relationship with technology, safe to say, safe to assume. So for the patients that Dean sees on a regular basis, what is their interaction with literally growing up with no other reality? The way that they communicate with themselves, the way that they communicate with the outside world, right? How has that affected their current emotional states? And so we like to use the same technology, so to speak, to try to better communicate with them or ask them, as Dean alluded to, how they're doing, and communicate that data feedback back to them. And we find, as Dean talked about, that sort of offers a new pathway for some patients, not all, to better engage in our treatment process. So I hope that kind of answers that question.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I mean, other than obviously what Dean said, that you're going to be getting data from the residential clients you have, how will you be getting data from patients that have already left, and their sort of longitudinal data?
That's a great question. And sort of what you're alluding to a little bit in there is tell us about the measures of success when somebody leaves treatment, right? Well, that goes back to sort of the philosophy of measurement in psychology, which is super ambiguous and very vague. So, right, strep throat is caused by a bacterial infection, right? You can take a sort of lab and identify those cells, and whether it's very binary, is there a bacterial infection or not? Well, how do you measure addiction or neuroticism or hope or impulsivity? So we use some sophisticated sort of data science to communicate with patients after they've left based on a series of questions and metadata off their phone, we call it digital exhaust, so to speak, right? To identify how somebody is doing based on what they did in treatment and then based on our sample. And so we specifically mean to leverage that through SMS, text message, straight to the patient's phone via an encrypted link. So we also have a full-time staff of peer recovery support specialists. So about 10 individuals who work on campus or throughout our health system, and their entire job is to develop a relationship with the patient after they've left. We call it the Recovery Care Advocates Program. And so there's a synergistic relationship between sort of like our technology outcomes platform and the peer recovery support specialists. And they work together to communicate sort of from a self-report perspective. Hey, how are you doing? How are your parents? How is your school? Are you going to meetings? Are you checking in with your primary care physician? While also we're collecting a lot of that metadata based off of the smartphone, right, to better inform us of maybe some underlying symptomology that might be taking place with that patient. So it's the best tools that we have right now, and we're excited that we have the opportunity to leverage that we have the space and the place to explore these possibilities with our patients. And so we ultimately just believe that this helps us better treat individuals here at the facilities that we work. And that's the very first place that we start, why we're doing it. And we hope that maybe some of the techniques and some of the insights that we gain, we can share with our friends and our peers throughout the field and try to better equip others to do the same.
That's brilliant. I mean, it's a really great, I think, initiative, and I really hope that it sort of, works out. And like you say, that others start to sort of get on board with it as well, and it like works across the industry then as a way of measuring and understanding, a better understanding, I guess, addiction as a whole and the recovery process. Well, guys, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. My name is Araminta Johnson, and you have just joined me at the most recent iCAAD iTalks. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you and my guests here today. If you'd like to access any other resources, you can do so at www.icaad.com. Thank you, and see you all soon.